For tonight's Conversations with Great Minds, I'm joined by Dr. Cornell West, a self-described champion of justice through the traditions of the Black Church. Dr. West is one of America's most important public intellectuals and a fierce advocate for democracy. He currently serves as the professor of philosophy and Christian practice at the Union Theological Seminary and is the author of 20 books, including the classics Race Matters and Democracy Matters. Dr. Cornell West joins us now from our New York studios. Dr. West, it's an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a blessing for you to have me.
Yeah, and
a blessing for me to have you.
Yeah,
to be on your show, I should say.
What started? You know, we've bounced off each other a number of times over the years, you know, being on my show and speaking in the same venues and things, but I've never had an opportunity to really get in a conversation with you about what got you started on the path that led you to where you are now. What sparked your interest in both politics and religion?
No, to be quite honest, though, brother, it has to do with living in the middle of the American empire and wrestling with the vicious legacy of white supremacy. I grew up in California. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was deeply affected by both lynchings and going back to family, deeply affected by not just discrimination, but Jim Crow. And Jim Crow in America is very unique and distinctive. It was a terrorizing, it was a traumatizing, it was a stigmatizing of black people, but of course it was connected to genocidal attacks on indigenous peoples and marginalization of brown peoples and subordination of working peoples of all colors, though, brother. So from the very beginning, the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and then the Black Panther Party fundamentally shaped who and what I am.
Was there any particular moment in your life or event in your life or around you in the world at large that caused you to say, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go in this direction, or this has to be my next step?
No, I think in many ways it was the death of Martin Luther King Jr., April 4th, 1968, something deep inside of my heart and the heart of many peoples, especially black people, but peoples of all color. It died. Yeah. And the question is, what would be resurrected, what would be reinvigorated given that vicious murder and assassination of Martin King? And it was also connected, of course, to the death of so many anonymous and nameless people struggling at the time, and of course assassinations of Malcolm X and Medgar Evers and a variety of the Fred Hamptons and Bobby Huttons of the Black Panther Party. The sense of people who are willing to forfeit their lives for the furtherance of truth and justice. That's the language, as you know, of John Brown, November 2nd, 1859, the last speech that he gave, that spirit of being willing to pay the ultimate cost for a cause greater than one's own self-interest.
Yeah, yeah. And in that context and in that frame, I'm curious if you see any parallels between what happened to Emmett Till and what happened to Trayvon Martin.
Oh, no doubt that, you know, Brother Emmett Till, as you know, precious brother from Chicago, went down to gut bucket Jim Crow, Mississippi, was shot down like a dog. That was the old Jim Crow. That was the Jim Crow that was legalized. It was American law, as you know, given your magnificent work, my brother. It was American law to not just criminalize black people, but to terrorize and traumatize black people. With Brother Trayvon Martin, it's under the new Jim Crow, where young black males, especially poor black males and females, are criminalized, they're demeaned, they're degraded. That's a form of soul murder, and that enables physical murder, as in the case of the Zimmerman. I still call it a murder. I still call it a killing in that sense. No matter what the law says, I do not accept racist verdict. I don't accept racist jurors, but I recognize I have to come to terms with the reality of those kind of verdicts and jurors' decisions. But there's parallels in the sense that it's old Jim Crow and new Jim Crow. And this is part and parcel of not just affecting black people, but affecting working people. It makes it very difficult, of course, for people of different colors to come together and keep track of the oligarchs, keep track of the plutocrats, both here and around the world. And it makes it very difficult for white liberals and black liberals to gain a footing in a context in which the truth about their hypocrisy is more and more disclosed.
Well, Well, I want to get into that hypocrisy in just a second, but just to finish on the Jim Crow theory, my friend and colleague Joe Madison was here a couple days ago, and he said, you know, it's no longer Jim Crow; it's now James Crow, ESQ, and to a certain extent, that's subtle, more subtle, more. You know, we've seen it with the Supreme Court. We see it with all these states that are changing all these laws, and it makes it, I think, harder for average white people who don't have much contact with the issues and don't think about these issues. It's not the same kind of in-your-face stuff we saw when you and I were young, you know, back in the 60s and the 70s.
Right.
How do we cut through that? How do we expose that? It seems like the Trayvon Martin murder and the George Zimmerman trial has at least cracked open that conversation, but it's got to be a lot more than that, does it not?
No, that's true. That's true. But I want to come back to Brother Joe Madison. He does such a magnificent job down in Washington, D.C. as the Black Eagle. But there is a difference between James Esquire Jr. That holds for the black middle classes, because it's not in the face of the black middle classes and their children. But for the black poor and their children, the new Jim Crow is just as in your face with stop and frisk. As you know, Carl Dixon, a number of others and myself went to jail just a year or so ago to try to highlight stop and frisk, where they've had millions of young brothers and sisters who are stopped and frisked. Only about 4% have any connection to any crime. It's been what's about 700,000 every year. That's in your face. The exponential explosion in the prison industrial complex is in your face. That 62% of those precious brothers and sisters of all colors, but disproportionately black and brown, are there because of soft drug offenses. White community, 13% of the white community takes drugs. 13% of the black community takes drugs. Over 55% of the convictions are black. So the mass incarceration, which is a class incarceration, class and race being inextricably interwoven, and that is as in your face as the old Jim Crow. So that the James Esquire Jr. is at work for black professionals. But in terms of the black poor, the new Jim Crow has been vicious, and the black liberal leadership hardly says anything about the new Jim Crow. Of course, you hear Brother Barack Obama say a mumbling word about the new Jim Crow whatsoever. So when he talks about we're a nation of laws, well, I mean, it's a joke in terms of the levels of lawlessness of the United States. Wall Street criminals, the law doesn't hold for them. Not one executive gone to jail. The wiretappers, the law doesn't hold for them. The torturers, the law doesn't hold for them. All the corruption that we know at the top, the wickedness at the top, hardly touched. But when it comes to criminality, they zero in on the weak, zero in on the most vulnerable, and that's new Jim Crow. And that new Jim Crow is vicious, raw, coarse, and brutal. James Esquire Jr. for the black middle classes, brown middle classes, very, very weak, but still operating, as it were. I mean, you know what, I consider the kind of, I think we've witnessed in the last 20 years a kind of re-niggerization of the black professional class. Never in the history of America have so many black people have so much money, power, status, but never in the history of black America have so many black professionals been afraid, intimidated, deferential to power, subservient to the status quo. We used to have elements of the black petty bourgeoisie that would tell the truth in our churches and lawyers and doctors. Now, so many of them are bought off. So many of them are selling out, and it's a sad thing to see. That's what I mean by the moral bankruptcy of so much of the black liberals and the black professional class. We can bounce back, but we have to tell the truth about it. And Barack Obama, in many ways, is exemplary of that moral bankruptcy and that moral inconsistency in terms of turning his back to the new Jim Crow, turning his back to the black poor, turning his back to those folk who are dealing with brutal circumstances, privatizing of education. You see, indecent housing, indescribable levels of massive unemployment and underemployment. So people haven't been employed for years upon years, don't even figure, not even on the radar screen in the statistics that come out of the Labor Department. They're suffering totally invisible, you see. And that's the kind of thing that deeply, deeply upsets me, as you can imagine, my brother.
You talk about liberal hypocrisy, and I had not heard at length you speak before about liberal hypocrisy within the African American community, but certainly you've spoken about it within the white community. Is there a fundamental difference between the two?
Oh, sure. Namely because, of course, black liberals still have to deal with the vicious legacy of white supremacy. And, I mean, you see it on MSNBC in the last few days, that the hurt is genuine among the black professionals. It's genuine among the black upper middle classes because racism and white supremacy is still very real, it's ugly, it's vicious. Some people say, well, for the first time I feel some alienation from the state. I feel over against my government. You don't say. Why don't you spend a little time in the prison, spend a little time on the block, spend a little time among people who have been wrestling with the underside of the American empire for the last 30 years with this class war from above, one-sided against poor and working people of all colors with stagnating wages and profits going up. But this particular issue of Trayvon Martin, where the raw, very raw and coarse side of the repressive apparatus of the U.S. nation state and its imperial tentacles becomes unavoidable, becomes you have to confront it. And so black liberals then have a capacity, I think, to see some things that many white liberals may not see because their children, of course, still not subject to stop and frisk, still not subject to the kind of thing that Brother Trayvon Martin had to go through.
I think there's a lot of white liberals who still don't even understand what white privilege is.
You say what?
I think there are a lot of white liberals who still don't even understand the concept of white privilege.
No, oh no, I think that's true. I think you're
so. What do we do about that?
Well, we've got to teach. We've got to embrace because they still have the capacity to be progressive, but you just don't trust them, and you tell the truth, and it's a brutal truth, it's a painful truth, and they accept it and grow, or they don't accept it and live in a state of denial, which is often the case. Now, of course, you got the right wing that we can't forget about. I mean, you got 1,100 white supremacist militia groups in America. That's one of the things that upset me about my my dear sister Sada Shakur, one of the grand black freedom fighters in the 60s, where the Obama administration and Eric Holder's Justice Department has put a $2 million bounty on her head on the terrorist list, the top 10 terrorist list. You think of all of the white supremacist militia groups, all of the various folk terrorizing indigenous peoples, black peoples, brown peoples, none of them on the list, but Assata Shakur's on the list. How hypocritical can you get? That's what I mean by the moral bankruptcy of black liberalism and black centrism. But you have to just tell the truth. As you know, I'm a Christian, though, brother. I'm a revolutionary Christian. I'm a Jesus-loving, free black man coming out of the legacy of Martin King, which means that I acknowledge that no matter where one is at the moment, one can potentially be better.
Right.
And therefore, you don't allow one's whole humanity to be defined as where one is at a particular moment. People can change.
Yes. Yes.
Malcolm X grew over time, magnificent. All of us undergoing change and transformation. I don't like to freeze any of us at a particular moment, but I do believe this, my brother. The depths of my soul. I believe that a child in Pakistan, in Yemen, and Somalia has exactly the same status as a child in Newtown, Connecticut, on the south side of Chicago, in Koreatown, in the Brown Barrio, or on indigenous people's reservation. I am an internationalist across the board.
Okay, Dr. West,
when I talk about coming out of the legacy of Martin King, it includes Pablo Neruda.
Yeah, Dr. West, excuse me, forgive my interrupting you, but we've got to take a break for just a second. We'll be right back. More of tonight's conversations with Dr. West, welcome back. First of all, when we had to take a break at the oddities of television or whatever, we just had to cut in there, and you were in the middle of a really good riff about being an internationalist and children around the world and the obligation of Americans of all colors and races. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you want to finish that thought and share, what brought you to that observation, and where do you think we all should be going from that?
Well, I think there's a lot of roads to internationalism, a lot of roads to universalism. For me as a Christian, it has to do with the cross, and that cross enacts and embodies unconditioned love unconditional love on the one hand, and unarmed truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. So anybody fundamentally concerned about truth, fundamentally concerned about love, and justice is what love looks like in public, in the way in which tenderness is what love feels like in private, then you're going to be an internationalist. And this is what I mean by Trayvon Martin has exactly the same status as that new baby that will be born with royalty in England, with that precious Dalit brother or sister in India, with those in East Timor, with those anywhere in the world, as it were. And we always have to test our leaders. I mean, is it the case that President Obama has a commitment to justice for Trayvon Martin with the same level as intensity as he does in persecuting Brother Bradley Manning and Brother Edward Snowden? But you see, for me, it's quite ironic that you get black president and black leaders who, on the one hand, talk about their connection to the struggle for black freedom. Well, you see, Brother Bradley Manning and Brother Edward Snowden, they are the John Browns of the U.S. national security state, of the U.S. massive surveillance state. In the same way, my dear brother Glenn Greenwald and my brother Chris Hedges, they are the William Lloyd Garrisons of the U.S. national security state, which is to say, I use the paradigm of the struggle for black freedom as a struggle for freedom of everyone. And you have those who are willing to forfeit their lives, Manning, Snowden, those who are willing to tell the truth against unbelievable burdens, cutting against the grain, Greenwald, Hedges, and we can add some others as well, Naomi Klein and Glenn Ford and my dear brother Bruce Dixon and Margaret Nellie Bailey and Margaret Kimberly of the Black Agenda, their magnificent radio, what is it, the Black Agenda Report, that's what it is, or the folk at Counterpunch. I mean, these are the folk who are the truth bearers, who are the witness bearers, and it's very difficult for their voices to surface, but if they don't surface, yeah, we're in a world of trouble, brother.
Yeah, we are. You mentioned, and speaking of that, you mentioned the Zimmerman trial. We've touched upon it very briefly up to this point, but I'm curious, first of all, just in general, your thoughts on the acquittal of George Zimmerman, and more specifically, it seemed quite clear to me that there were two standards of justice, that basically two people were put on trial at the same time, that George Zimmerman was on trial for killing Trayvon Martin, but Trayvon Martin was on trial for being such a threat to George Zimmerman that he was worthy of being shot. And the standard of justice that was explicit in the trial and explicit in the media, and I couldn't figure out why nobody had their head exploding around this, was that George Zimmerman was held to the standard of, oh, if he was afraid, he should have shot. But the standard of justice that was being held for Trayvon Martin was, oh, if he was afraid, he should have run. What the hell is going on?
No, I mean, this is what I meant by once you criminalize the people, then it's not just dehumanizing, but it means those who are in power are subject to do what they will in order to preserve themselves. So that Zimmerman could have done nearly anything in order to preserve himself once he's perceived as dealing with a criminalized person, a menace, a thug, a villain, a gangster, as it were. And you keep in mind, I mean, the criminal justice system in America historically has been itself criminal when it comes to black people and people of color. I mentioned before, 244 years, slavery was the law of the land. For almost 100 years, Jim Crow was the law of the land. So therefore, as a nation of laws, it was deeply white supremacist laws. It was racist laws. And under new Jim Crow, especially as it relates to police and police power vis-a-vis the black poor, it's still criminal, so that the criminal justice system itself is criminal in terms of its treatment, but is not a crime based on the criminal justice system. And that's where the legality and morality depart. Mm-hmm. That's where the law itself lacks any ethical content. That's why Brother Martin Luther King Jr. went to jail in Birmingham and said these laws are themselves criminal, and the behavior of the police are criminal. That's what Martin was saying in a letter from the Birmingham jail. And that's precisely what we must say today. But we must say it in love, though. And this is very important, though. You see, if love is not in it, it's all sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. It's not about hating George Zimmerman. It's about hating the white supremacy inside of him. It's hating the criminalizing proclivities inside of him. And a lot of my secular leftist brothers and sisters don't like me saying this, but I have to speak the truth as I understand it. And I don't believe that a hating of persons as opposed to hating of systems, of global oligarchic systems, no matter where they are. They can be in the United States, they can be in Russia, they can be in South Africa, they can be in South America. Wherever they are, oligarchy, plutocracy must be called into question. Wherever everyday people are, wherever ordinary working people are, they must be supported. Their humanity must be affirmed over against these oligarchic systems. And the same is true in the United States. But as you know, in the United States, we have tremendous challenges in terms of the lies that we're willing to live under and the crimes that we're willing to too often be indifferent toward. I mean, you know, U.S. drones now have killed, what, over 200 innocent brothers and sisters in Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia and counting. No serious debate about it. Yeah. You know, Manning discloses the video, and those who are involved in the crime walk off free. The person who exposes the crime, he's sent to jail for life. I mean, this is the level of hypocrisy that we're dealing with. And this has been a challenge ever since the founding of this nation. And those of us who are on the progressive side of history will just go down swinging like Muhammad Ali, Ella Fitzgerald, trying to tell the truth and bear witness to love and justice.
Yeah. Can we talk about partisan politics for a second?
Sure.
I had dinner the other day with a friend who used to be a Republican and still is fairly well connected in those circles, a white Republican, and he said that the gerrymandering that's going on, he said there's a lot of people scratching their heads looking at all the Republican gerrymandering that's going on, trying to figure out why Republicans would go into a congressional district that's already consistently electing Democrats and still keep it Democratic, but they would move a lot of African Americans into that district. And he finally confronted somebody about this, said, what's going on? And what came back, and again, this is secondhand, this may not be the case, but this, I thought, what came back was our goal over the next 20 years, these people think long, our goal over the next 2 censuses is to try to make sure, try to get to the point where virtually every elected Democratic official, big D Democratic official, has a black face, so that the Democratic Party is perceived as the party of black people. So we're going to take white congressional districts, move enough black people in those districts that the white person will be replaced by a black person, and that we won't have to do anything about racism. The intrinsic and inherent racism, subtle racism that white people don't even realize they have will come out, and that'll be the end of the Democratic Party. A, do you think that that's a crazy conspiracy theory, although it seems to me that that's actually what they're doing? And B, if so, what do we, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you know, the Republicans would do anything to grab power, but Democrats would do anything to grab power, too. I mean, my assumption is I've reached a point in my life, my brother, where I think the two-party system in the American empire and in the American political system itself is dying. That both parties themselves are just so vacuous when it comes to any kind of serious moral witness. They're both tied to big money. They're both tied to big corporations. They're tied to big banks. There are slight differences between them in terms of social issues. So our precious gay brothers and sisters, yes, they must be protected. They must be supported. Women must be protected and supported. But when it comes to the issues of poverty, there's a bipartisan consensus. Neither party is talking about it at all. When it comes to the prison-industrial complex, have you heard any party say anything about the hunger strike in California? No. 30,000 folk. Torture itself, torture, solitary confinement, long sustained solitary confinement, those are forms of torture, not a mumbling word. You see the bipartisan consensus toward Brother Edward Snowden. You see the bipartisan consensus in terms of Wall Street. Democratic Party, Obama themselves, tied to Wall Street, bailing out Wall Street, not bailing out homeowners, not supporting the trade union movement, manipulating the trade union movement in the way you manipulate black folk, the way you manipulate other so-called special interest groups in the Democratic Party. Both parties at this point are just so moribund, it strikes me, that we need either social motion and social activism on the outside or fundamental transformation of a new party or a break-off, very similar to what would happen in the 1850s, a break-off of both parties are coming together. I do like small elements of the libertarian perspective. I am a libertarian to the degree to which rights and liberties must be central, and part of the divide line these days is between an authoritarian government that is undermining rights and liberties and those who are defending rights and liberties. And you can be a Rand Paul who talks about drones only in relation to American citizens, not non-American civilians, but we need to talk about both. But I'm with Brother Rand Paul. But Rand Paul and I would agree with about what?
Yeah.
You know, we agree about 5 or 6%, but the libertarian element is very important. That's a possible realignment between progressives and those who are concerned about rights and liberties. But the two-party system, for me, is it's about gone in terms of its effectiveness, though, brother.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Dr. Cornell West, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, and I salute you, my brother.
Thank you. Have a great evening.